Hey there! Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Yes, I'm finally back, and it's for a big one. The newest album from Taylor Swift, The Life of a Showgirl. The problem with writing Taylor Swift reviews for over a decade now is that eventually my personal experience might mirror hers in more ways than one, or that you might expect. You finally fall in love with someone that makes your life better in every possible way. Your union feels like a quintessence of relief and joy. But in that moment, you might also feel like you've run out of the right words to express it, or indeed the right words to express much of anything else. See, among the many reasons you're never going to see my partner on camera, or indeed much at all beyond some social media flickers, is that aside from some well-deserved privacy and watching so many of my peers share way too much of both on the right and wrong things on social media, I'm not so self-absorbed to be convinced that it's anyone's business or that it's all that interesting overall. We're two millennials who have done reasonably well in our mid-30s, and while I could go on at length about what makes our experience so unique and special to me, would any of you honestly care that much? And if you do, really? And that might seem insane to ask in the era of parasocial relationships, but I've been around online too long, but long enough to see that relationship come and go many times over, feel every boon and pitfall of it. And so is Taylor Swift, especially given the mad, years-long maelstrom that's been the Eras Tour. Plenty of pop icons have done world-breaking tours, but none quite like that. And throughout those 2 years, she's still found time to release 2 more Taylor's versions, and the maligned and oft misunderstood The Tortured Poets Department last year. Now, I still hold that album, not quite the anthology, as one of the best projects of 2024. But I also know that I love it because it's melodramatic and cringy and painfully self-aware about all of it, which can come across as obnoxious, indulging in her worst possible impulses and seemingly insulated from any consequence but from those on her own psyche, which has been through the absolute ringer. So what does it then mean to win? Because for all intents and purposes, Taylor Swift has won every game she's played. She settled the last of her big scores in business. She bought back her masters, which mercifully leaves us spared of the re-recordings of the self-titled debut and Reputation. Trust me, after what happened with the re-recording of 1989, you don't want either of those. And she's now engaged to a Hall of Fame NFL player in Travis Kelce, where to my quiet astonishment, they seem happy. They seem content. She spun previous failed relationships into gold and diamonds, and I've never believed that art must come from suffering. Talk to any working class artists, especially around right now. They'll tell you that having resources and stability can help you make far better art than poverty and insecurity. And if you look back on Folklore, Evermore, and Midnights, that's not far from true with Taylor Swift either. The narrative that she can only write about heartbreak and boys should be long dead by now. But suffering is not the same thing as challenge. And for a billionaire who can recruit Max Martin and Shellback for every song, losing the challenge might be the real issue, even one as self-aware and paradoxically thin-skinned as Taylor Swift is. In other words, I had a lot of bad feelings going into The Life of a Showgirl, written in the midst of the Eras Tour and following the arc of her romance with Travis Kelce. Every touring act eventually writes the whole touring as hell song or album, but it's rarely their best project because it lives and dies on relatability and their struggle. And the bigger the artist and their reputation are, if it precedes them, the less likely it's going to stick the landing. And it's really a good album to end the story on, especially when, like me, you've been hoping that Taylor Swift could take a proper break going back to Evermore, when you know that in your gut that she'll take any backlash harder than anyone else. You rise that high, you're going to have a long way to fall. alcohol. She's known that since the alcohol-soaked hall of mirrors that was Reputation. But 2 years of her silent majority fan base giving her untold fame, power, and adulation around the world, that would distort anything for anyone. And that could make for fascinating commentary on show business and fame and wealth and social circles that are beyond comprehension for the vast majority. But she already did a lot of that on Midnights, which I've long called Reputation done right. And even then, at what point does self-awareness even matter when you've got every reason to believe all your own hype and nobody will ever say no to you ever again? And thus, from the god-awful plastic album art to the track titles to every note of dread underscoring the promotion for this, even if it has charted insanely well, I had every reason to believe this wouldn't be good. Certainly not a career-ending disaster, she's way too savvy and insulated for that, but as someone who loved Midnight, and yes, even the Tortured Poets department, it would be the point for me to step back off the bandwagon, where I've been back and forth since Speak Now 15 years ago. So alright, enough dancing around this. How's the album? So here's what I'd like for all of us to do, if possible. I'm hoping that since the review's later, we can do it. Take a step back, reestablish some context. The tricky thing about a maelstrom of all-consuming discourse is that getting caught in the eye of the vortex might be exhilarating, but you can wind up missing the forest for the trees, for better and for worse. Something that I understood back when I reviewed Reputation 8 years ago and feels all the more prescient now. As such, there is a part of me that's extremely grateful that I wrote this review a considerable distance away from stable Wi-Fi or any cellular data, which allowed me to catch some fleeting glimpses of said discourse, but remain largely detached from the heady morass of raving and backpedaling, poptimism, backlash to the backlash, and pure unadulterated bullshit. And it's tempting to wade into all that, especially when in contrast the album is the least essential and least interesting that Taylor Swift has been to date. Not her worst album, but probably the least good, which for some will be the far greater sin. Where in discussing this with my partner, well, I considered that making this is not a Taylor Swift review, but that would also kind of skirt around the real issues with this project that actually deserve a proper examination. Issues that haven't, in my opinion, received nearly as much discourse as they should. If anything, there's a deeper problem, and it goes beyond just Taylor. But as such, there are factors that have dominated the discourse around the life of a showgirl that aren't nearly as relevant as social media will try to convince you that they are, especially when they have little to do with the actual music on the album. I don't care about the bad film experience or the avalanche of exclusives as Swift and her team continue to milk the Swifties for all they're worth, as they just keep on buying them. If you hate that she's playing billionaire capitalism by way of poptimism chart games, and I kind of do, if you think it's wasteful or gross or just find it all insanely tacky, take comfort in that it probably has a shorter shelf life than she thinks it does. The market is still mostly there, but it appears to be kind of shrinking. And while we're on the Swifties and fandom, look, I don't care about any beef or projections upon the presumed or assumed demographic that supports her music. Your grievances with liberal millennial white women that you want to play out throughout their most obvious, painstakingly constructed avatar, they are not nearly as interesting, accurate, or potent as you seem to think they are, especially when your own presumed favorites can be tarred with many of the same brushes or worse. I really wish I didn't have to bring up that side of the conversation, but it's actually regrettably tied to the album's content. We will get to it later. You already know what's coming. And the last factor, Travis Kelce. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. As much as you find the whole celebrity couple cringe, or you hate the Kansas City Chiefs, or even if you dislike Travis Kelce's mustache, and I do, it's fucking terrible, the amount of she had to dub it down so Travis could understand, paired with the most tired and flat out inaccurate stereotypes of professional football players that I've ever seen, it reminds me way too much of the high school gossipy nonsense that I thought y'all were supposed to be above. right? I thought that was at the root of why you hated this album, that Taylor Swift was regressing down to that level. And yet I'm seeing the exact same sort of patronizing policing by proxy, which has you sound exactly as envious, bitter, and ignorant as the gambling addicts who harass NFL players and their families for presumed point shaving. I might not fully understand the whole Travis Kelce Taylor Swift relationship. It seems to have lasted way longer than I personally expected, knowing her. It appears to be real. It's not a PR stunt as so many have claimed. But Travis Kelce, the romantic archetype, that's quite frankly more relevant to discussing the album than Travis Kelce the person. Just like Joe Alwyn and Harry Styles and Jake Gyllenhaal and John Mayer and even Matty Healy were beforehand. It wasn't really about the person, it was about what they meant and represented for Taylor. And that's really where the roots of The Life of a Showgirl are. The deeply rooted shock and fear that Taylor Swift has found someone where it works. That after being burned privately and publicly so many times, she actually found a partner where the connection feels very real. And that opens up possibilities in her life that she didn't think could ever happen for her. The opening run of tracks on the album, Fate of Ophelia, Elizabeth Taylor, Opalite probably being the best of them, they're not joyous or exuberant, but they're muted and cautious, with chic glam textures that she's used before, but that seem to crumble into softer flutters at the album's midpoint as she begins to actually consider marriage, settling down as real possibilities. Not retirement from music or even taking a break. She's been swift to disabuse every one of that, even if the latter might help her recharge her creative batteries, but dreams that she long buried possibly being reignited, or dreams she didn't think she could admit before. I think some of this might have also alienated audiences who have claimed that she's always wanted to be this conservative trad wife, the football cheerleader who married the star player, insert small town Americana archetypes and symbolism here. And truthfully, I think it's more nuanced than that. Firstly, Taylor Swift has never shied that far away from longing from that traditional fairy tale romance, even as she has deconstructed it on recent albums, and she was revisiting it frequently during the Eras tour. A metamodernist framing of her work can acknowledge both the power of that narrative and her own self-conscious critique of it. And extrapolating to the mostly undercooked showgirl framing on this album, there is something to when the performer gets a bit older and reflects on friends or lovers that she could have had then slip away, like on Ruin the Friendship, or figure out what that next step is in her life when she just can't do it like she used to. If this album has any tangible emotional core, it's recognizing the toll of what that next possibility could be when you've conquered it all, especially if that future feels smaller, less in the spotlight, but paradoxically more relatable, where she knows in her heart there's never gonna be another Eras tour on that scale. And if she found someone who actually gets what that spotlight is and can help balance her out, fulfill an old high school fantasy to boot, shit, what more could she want? I get waiting for a long time to find that person. It matters. But here comes the first real problem. If you're looking for a more in-depth songwriter take on these thoughts, this is not an album designed to create that, and I hear a lot of disappointment from those who may have expected it, especially coming off of the Tortured Poets department or her more songwriterly styled albums. Let's step back away from the hyperbole and the whole voice of a generation spin around Taylor Swift as a songwriter for a second, because her greatest skills have always come in relatability, accessibility, and some evocatively honest turns of phrase. All of that can lead to tremendous popularity, but it becomes a tenuous balancing act between the higher pretensions, where an English teacher will get eye-rolled out of the room amidst English professors in study or extended sabbatical with way too much time and alcohol on their hands, specifically online, or the shifting tides of mass market appeal. The Tortured Poets department was the former, this is the latter, albeit with enough literary reference points to possibly set up that she could be going there right from the opening track's Hamlet subversion, which is really kind of shallow, which might lead to some misplaced expectations, and I get that. And going back to what I've said around Red in 1989, the pop star thing has never been the easiest fit for her, especially with changing times. And when you pair that with Taylor Swift's greatest weaknesses as a writer, a desperate desire to be seen as moral and the underdog that would give Nietzsche fits, a long-running insecure petty streak, and despite some attempts to cultivate mystique, a little too much overshared for the glamour to remain that pristine, even if she then tries to own it, it can make her attempts at swaggering, borderline nihilistic pop dominance feel really clumsy, especially as she's become, well, considerably less relatable with time. I've been saying that since 1989. Very early on the album, we get Father Figure, where alongside a truly awkward George Michael interpolation, we get her acting out her Succession fantasy a few albums late, but not as Shiv Roy, a more obvious parallel. Or if I wanted to be cruel, she's probably closer to Kendall with this album, but as the mercurial and decaying patriarch Logan Roy, where she gets the power of flipping the gender dynamic and then vicariously enjoying that monstrous, domineering energy. And you know what? It's not strange because it's her doing it. I heard The Man and its ham-fisted social commentary 6 years ago, especially that video. But that billionaire status has her completely missing the cavalcade of other lessons and misfortunes dealt out to Logan Roy in succession. I mean, she's read Hamlet, maybe not King Lear, and she should. Maybe that's what makes every brand name flex and imperious glare feel slightly askew. She's won enough where she wants to revel in her power, played the game the right way, and won, but not only is it incongruous alongside her love story, her temperament and execution has those moments hit a contradictory, uncanny valley. It's why the title track with her heir apparent, Sabrina Carpenter, sets up how you might not want the life of a showgirl, but then thematically utterly ignores that implication so much it's just their ability to conquer the misgivings and indeed have it all. Because it worked. It worked for her. It's why Cancelled is such a bad song beyond the obvious factor of anyone writing a song about this in 2025 that's already being appropriated by the worst people imaginable on social media. A flex of power combined with this intense desire to be seen as moral around people who have already figured out all that ugly game and are comfortable discarding morality because the grift can bring in just as much. Look, it feels disingenuous in a truly damaging way, even if it wasn't intended to be. At least Wood was charmingly stupid in its arsenal of dick jokes, sexual double entendres. Good for Travis, I guess. She at least sounded like she was having fun there. And then there's what many have described as the rock bottom point of this album, Taylor Swift's response track to Charli XCX's Sympathy is a Knife, Actually Romantic. Let's get it out of the way now. The song sounds like a choppy demo, a weedy and gutless recreation of Where's My Mind by way of Say Ain't So, where Swift is truly bad at playing the same card as Mariah Carey did on Obsessed with Eminem nearly 20 years ago, clearly included because she wanted to add some spice to put a rival in her place. Do I think it was successful or a good look? Not remotely. If Taylor Swift has more than a professional relationship with Kendrick Lamar, or quite frankly, any better equipped artist in feuds, not you, Nicki Minaj, sit down, they could have probably talked her off the edge. But I'm gonna push back against the assertion that Swift didn't get Sympathy is a Knife, even if it's an obviously better song. Because once you reckon with the fact that nobody really has the high ground here, let alone Charli XCX, the Reputation Tour antics, Dirty Hit, Rina Sawayama, Red Scare, the fact that even despite all the coke-infused ironic disaffection, Brat embraces that same level of moral ambiguity and even flirtation with settling down and family in the final couple songs. Did nobody think about the themes on that project? Taylor Swift is petty enough to look at all the plausible deniability around Sympathy is a Knife and get that it doesn't fucking matter if she understands it or not, especially in years well past of any Girl Squad. Presuming it's not just some marketing gimmick like the remix of Girl So Confusing, it feels apropos to quote this. Sometimes it is a big dick competition, and I don't think Charlie would come out nearly as well as Gen Z stan Twitter would think she would. Granted, I also don't think Taylor would come out well here either, because while her slang is outdated in the much maligned Eldest Daughter, it winds up having the most teeth to me. She's never been the savage bad bitch despite trying to put on the costume as such, but she'd rather try and fail to be that than the irony poison too cool for anyone denizens online. I'm not surprised a lot of folks hate that song, because they don't want to admit, as much as she will say it, she's kind of right. But if I'm being blunt, that's not the biggest problem with The Life of a Showgirl. No, it's sadly much simpler and much more frustrating to untangle. The compositions, hooks, and especially the production is easily some of Taylor Swift's worst, and that includes Reputation, which at least had a coherent, if rather dated, aesthetic design. Okay, put aside the whole Vegas Showgirl throwback big band sound doesn't materialize at all. If you're making this on the road, that sort of arrangement can be tough to come by on short notice. Although with her budget, again, there's no excuse. But this is where I'm looking at both Max Martin and Shellback alongside Taylor Swift as a complete fumbling across the board. And while I could get conspiratorial and say that Max Martin quietly underdelivered as payback for not getting the Taylor's version calls to work on Red or 1989 outside of Message in a Bottle, where he was sorely missed if you paid attention to the details, the larger question might be whether they were ever good partners to work together to begin with. Taylor Swift's wordier lyricism, clumsy as it might be here, it's always felt a little bit awkward wedged into Max Martin's streamlined compositions going back to We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. Their record of legit great songs, it kind of begins with Style and Wildest Dreams, maybe Wonderland in a Pinch, and it ends with Delicate. And also includes stinkers like Shake It Off, I Knew You Were Trouble, Bad Blood, including the remix, and a whole lot of mediocre to bad songs on Reputation that only the diehard Swifties love. And it gets even worse when you consider how Max Martin and Shellback's work has felt significantly tarnished across the board in the 2020s, especially whenever they touch and subsequently mishandle any sort of trap percussion. The mixing just feels increasingly sickly. The guitars, they feel so underpowered and brittle. And the drums, they just often sound like complete ass, like on Father Figure or Wish List or Cancelled, or even the leaden thud of the title track. So this leaves many of the album's hooks almost completely reliant on Taylor Swift's vocals, which are good, but when the arrangements are either so shrink-wrapped and sterile or painfully underpowered, it places all of her questionable lyrical choices at the forefront and leaves the melodies, the tunes, the instrumentation kind of floundering. Say what you will about Jack Antonoff, and yes, I'm looking for all of your apologies to him and to me for being wrong about his work on the last two albums. He's not been the problem, but he at least also knew how to master the atmospherics, the thinner arrangements in order to accentuate her. Don't get me wrong, the muted gloss of the first couple of songs on this project, it had some character, even if Opalite sounds like the sickly sister to Harry Styles' Golden from like, oh my god, that was about 6 years ago, alongside the more ethereal arrangement of Eldest Daughter, which I still think is probably the best song here. But does it really make sense for the limp yacht rock of Ruin the Friendship to reference 50 Cent of all things? Or for Wood to sound like the Jackson 5 by way of a Bad Mariana's Trench Cut? And that might actually be overselling it. Josh Ramsey is a far better producer nowadays and honestly a much better singer. But truthfully, I'm really glad that I wrote all this review from halfway across the world, largely removed from a lot of the hyperbolic and quite frankly asinine discourse that's curdled around this and I observed and sampled later. From the fawning praise from some outlets that feels like a desperate plea for an interview rather than critique. Honestly, it looks compromised. To those who have tilted so far the other end, where you have contradictory swings between these insufferable cringe or calling it soulless and cynical, alongside Dostoevsky quotes about greed never leading to good art. Yeah, they can go see Jay-Z, Master P, and Michael Eisner in the back for that. And it's frustrating because the album isn't worth such wild swings of opinion beyond the fame of Taylor Swift. The most galling thing about how such milquetoast music and small-scale yearnings feel so paltry in the face of all the marketing and hype. It's trying to sell the Emperor's newest fashion line, but bad promotion should be separate from the album itself. You'd think that most critics and publicists and journalists would get that. But thinking of Michael Eisner, and by extension Disney, I've seen more than a few comparisons, but this feels most like a 2010s to 2020s Disney sequel, and I include the Marvel Cinematic Universe in that too. It's basically competent, but it's overwritten, it's retreading old ground, done better, more concerned with filling in stories and lore that can't really stand alone, and entirely too pleased with itself for delivering serviceable product when there was a real hope that it could have done more. It calls back to better stuff, and it's just not something I'm going to want to revisit. I'd hope that Taylor Swift might take a break and not immediately reply given the backlash to this. Maybe enjoy being engaged, get married, you finally have time to take a breath, recharge your batteries artistically. But I've made that bad bet before, and I expect a pretty fast turnaround, probably sometime next year. It'll probably be just my luck. And also probably to her detriment, especially as she's not touring for this album. And as for the life of a showgirl, it's hard to disappoint low expectations. Not her worst, but if you haven't heard it, and you're probably in the minority there, you're not missing anything. So yes, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yes, I have been gone for, well, about 3 weeks. Guess what? I got married. I was on my honeymoon. I was halfway around the world. I actually do have a lot of reviews coming, but how I'm structuring them, well, stay tuned for that. It's probably not going to be individual videos. It might be one larger aggregate video. We will have to see. But again, thank you all so much for sticking around. If you want to subscribe. I know I'm late to all the discourse, but hey, that's what the comment section is there for. Have fun. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, get albums on my schedule, just yell at me on my Discord. Link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. I think we're heading into a recession, so everyone be safe. I hope it all goes all right, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse. Welcome back, and I'll see you next time.